What's going on, everybody? We're back. New month, new stream. It's Jeff. Good to see you. It's the start of July. It's the first day of the Hulai challenge for Houdini. It's also Canada Day, honoring side effects in many different methods. The Canucks up there. I was just playing around with some Earth concepts or ideas or whatever, but I don't think I'm going to submit anything today, or I don't know, hold off for a little bit on that stuff. You guys have seen the Hulai challenges. People are making all kinds of Earth stuff out of nodes and art and things like that. So if you just search for this hashtag, you'd see people's submissions. There's some cool different things being done and all that. And then I think at the Side Effects website for the forums, they have their submissions. So each day of this month, they're giving you a different prompt of like a different effect or a different motion. I don't know. It's very open to interpretation or whatever, depending on how you tackle it. The node-based world. Yes, I was just playing around with like displacement map, textures and stuff like that. I was doing like kind of glass. Might have messed it up. I was trying to have a secondary sphere that was like a little bit bigger than kind of like go through the displacements. That was going to be like a blue tinted glass or something like that. Let me see if I think I boosted the resolution of my mesh to be too high or whatever. But yeah, I will close this in a little bit. I'm just going to give people a chance to come in, and then we'll get started, or I guess get finished with the bubble, underwater bubble effects. So that's the main thing that we'll be working on today, and be the third, I believe the third stream we spend on it. Just finishing up the final kind of critiques or tweaks and adjustments and stuff like that to it. Dubtronics, how's it going? It's good to see all the people in here. You got Edvino, Vegan Nuts, Brando, Jeff. Yeah. I saw got some people already tackling some of this bubble stuff in the Discord as well. Got some good lighting and stuff like that happening here. I think the composition, like, it's pretty cool, some of these first few frames. So yeah, if you are looking to join the Discord or whatever, there's a link to that below my Twitch panel, below my Twitch window or whatever. Then you could get the scene files from previous streams, or just share results, experiments, ask questions, hang out. Any chance we will talk about how to extend the boundaries so we can texture a large body of water? I always see the edges of my tank sim. I'm not going to be going into that today, I don't believe. Usually I just try to work like in a way that I'm not exposing the boundaries, if that makes sense. Like I guess like just laying things out in a smart kind of fashion. There is like the sparse solver that you might be able to set up and tweak and stuff like that. And then for the top of the simulation, I would recommend putting like a ocean surface or something like that on it, but I don't know if I'm going to be talking too much about that today. Maybe in the future. I have some plans to go over some large scale ocean stuff and things like that eventually. But yeah, this one I was just playing around with some effects here to have like a tinted glass with roughness, just showing the water, or making it look like there was water or whatever under the earth continents or whatever. It was pretty cool. All right, so get rid of that. I've done some tweaks offline to try to get a little bit better of a simulation. So what I was trying to do here was just get more of the like directional force at the beginning. We had originally started and it was like really powerful, and then we eased back. I think I can get like the previous one. So this is what we left off with last Sunday. It would have been something like this. Oh no. So we had eased off of it a little bit. There was some problems with things expanding a little bit too much, and different things like that. So I'd gone in and kind of refined things a little bit and added some more smaller bubbles. This is kind of what I ended up with now. You'd see that there's that post simulation, like distortion kind of stuff that I was setting up with the VOPs. So you tell it's kind of working a little bit, just so that these are originally just particles with spheres copied onto them. Thank you, Edvino. Yeah, it's getting there. I don't know. I'm still. There's some tweaks I'm gonna go over for like some of these little bubbles. I might just have too many and stuff at the end. Like maybe some of them should just get scaled down or something like that. But it's coming along. It looks more natural, I think, in terms of the motion and the breakup and stuff like that. The only thing I really think is like maybe it's a bit too slow overall. Like if I do Shift F, I could change the frame rate here. So if I go to 96 frames a second, like there might be a little too much noise, like turbulence and stuff like that. But I think that this, in terms of that James Bond or Italian Job reference we were watching on Sunday, is like for the initial gas simulation, is a little bit better speed, I guess, overall for, I don't know, like this opening segment. Boom. I don't know, it feels a little bit better, but it's all subjective, or depends on your reference and how deep underwater you are, or I don't know, a lot of other factors. So this is going to be a little bit just going over techniques and stuff like that, I guess. So I'd added some more microsolvers, or this gas linear combination stuff. I might, let me see, might just put a hold on the music for a little bit. So this section is going to get a little bit more technical. So just make it a little bit easier to parse, or I don't know, to go through this, less distracting, I guess. So I added these microsolvers, and it's kind of hard to explain what I'm doing. There's also maybe making a drawing, or I'm going to show it with a 2D smoke solver in another file. But basically, one of the things that I realized, and it's in some of my older files and some of these things, is that there's just too much like expansion and stuff like that happening a little bit. So one thing you can do is add like viscosity to kind of slow stuff down. Another thing that I was kind of doing, because like what we were starting with was smoke. So if you have this source particle sphere, it can freely move very easily, like kind of any direction without nothing's like stopping it or pushing it back. So what I was doing with those micro solvers was basically saying like, sorry, I'm not used to drawing too well on here. Let's just redo this. I'm drawing on like a very small Wacom tablet right now. So one of the things that I was doing was basically finding empty regions of the fluid sim that don't have density and making a mask out of those regions and then multiplying the velocity down in that area. So it's kind of adding like drag or like a dampening effect. If you do particle sims and you do the air resistance or drag parameters, that's kind of what this same effect is, but happening in a voxel-based simulation or gas simulation. So basically, we're reducing these velocities that are going like outside of our original bubble, but we're allowing a lot more rolling and internal motion and just upward direction to happen. So hopefully that makes sense to people. My drawing isn't the greatest right here, but I think you can kind of see it a little bit in my render. So these guys can just kind of calms down the outsides of the bigger bubbles so that they're more contained, and then they just go upwards a little bit easier. But internally, bubbles and things can move freely, but then outside of it, there's a lot more pressure, or not pressure in the sense of the pressure field in the fluid simulation, but there's just more resistance, or it's harder for them to spread out or expand, essentially. So we'll go into a new scene and just set up an example for this. Yeah, it's something that you kind of have to draw out. Like when I'm setting up these things, I have a pretty good picture in my mind of what's going on. But to actually explain it to other people or for someone else to understand it, it takes a few minutes or some drawings or an example scene or something like that. So one of the things that I usually do, like if I'm trying to understand a force or an aspect of the fluid solver, is to go in and make just a test scene or something like that. So if we start with a grid, I usually like to work with the two-dimensional fluid tank. So one of the settings on the solver is that you can constrain your domain to just be two-dimensional, and then things solve pretty fast, and it's just easier to debug and stuff like that. So I'll just make a DOP network. I'm gonna scatter some points on this grid. Maybe we'll just do 10, and we don't need this relax iteration. My seed, I'm just gonna do $F so that it's updating every frame. And just to keep things moving a little bit more quickly, I might just take some nodes from this other scene. So this guy's looking for a domain to be in this input. I think I can just use this grid. Now it has some values, and then this two-dimensional is what I'm talking about. So instead of having voxels in Z, the entire simulation will just be two-dimensional. So if we look at, should show the voxel resolution. I might need to set some other stuff. I don't need velocity for right now. And let's just look at this visualization. We're looking at density. I think I need a p-scale attribute. So usually I just do this randomize. If I press the D button over here, then I can visualize the p-scale. So instead of CD, just do p-scale. And then for distribution, I usually just like to work with the ramp. And dimensions, we just need one value. It's a uniform scale, so it's just one value. It's not scaling for X, Y, and Z. It's just one uniform number, so one dimension. And then this minimum and maximum is a nice way to just get started. So something like that. And I'll just turn this back to points. And then we can see we're getting the density. This will also be available on YouTube, yes. Yeah, the two-dimensional stuff is pretty cool. I mean, it's a little bit different because you're not, I don't know, like the forces and the shapes you get are much different. But in terms of just understanding like the fundamentals, it's a good way of prototyping like new ideas when you're making forces and stuff like that. It's a bit more like if in real life, if you ever played around with like putting colors on the top of milk or like mixing paints on the top of water, it's kind of like that, because it's no longer like gas that's moving around in 3D. It's just constrained to like a two-dimensional surface. So we have the buoyancy. Basically, I'm taking my particles and then they're just getting added to the density field. So that's what we're visualizing right now. And then the temperature field, which is just a copy, like the same information is being put into temperature. And then using this buoyancy, things are moving upwards. So like 125 maybe for quicker bubbles. And then you could kind of see what I was talking about with just the problem overall. Things are expanding a bit too quickly. One thing I'm going to do is just reduce the source amount. So this is kind of what I mean is like this is more of like just a gas. It's less, yeah, you can make really cool textures. Like a soap film or stuff like that can be pretty cool as well. It's useful for a lot of other things, but it's also just really handy to visualize stuff. Especially too, because I'm like working at a pretty high resolution, like 690 by 690, but then because Z is just one, it can solve very quickly. I think the one catch is maybe like OpenCL isn't, maybe it used to have some issues with that, but it looks like it's working pretty well with it now. Yeah, so we just have pushing things upwards. I don't know how something I did slowed stuff down for a minute. Let me take a look at this. You should be maybe going up to this level. So if I just do density, then I get my fluid simulation. One of the things that I have found, I think, is like, I don't know if they fixed this, but you can't convert to a VDB. Like the VDB format, it's unable to display two-dimensional volumes in Houdini or whatever, but just leave it as a Houdini volume and it will be okay. Yeah, I don't know how this got really slow all of a sudden. Let me make sure that caching is off. Maybe just going back here, making this, I don't know. it's a curse. All right, so we have these things going up, and this is the problem that I'm talking about, is just like everything spreads out in not three dimensions, but just like every direction. And that's what I was trying to illustrate here with the drawing. So one of the things I was saying is you can use viscosity. So that might be a bit too high. Usually like you just have to start with pretty low numbers. And you can see here like things are becoming a little bit more contained. Just gonna go over to this tab, try to see if some of that stuff speeds it up at all. So yeah, that's one thing you can do is with viscosity. Like this is making the shapes a little bit more contained. And then if you go higher with it, they still spread out a good amount, and then overall we're just losing a lot of detail. Like everything is becoming quite smooth. It's really cool. You could get nice oils and stuff like that mixing. But for what we're doing, it's not what we're after. So we'll not use viscosity. That's more like just blurring the velocity field overall. So it does kind of have a similar effect of it's harder to move through the fluid, but it doesn't preserve details, which we want to preserve the details. So one of the things that I do is use this gas match field, and this just lets you make a new field. You can make anything you want. It's like an empty variable kind of, and I just use this to make a field called mask. So it's just going to be a scalar with one-dimensional value, like black and white, kind of like an alpha channel. Like this is another reason this working this way is good, because it's just more like image processing. Then my reference field is just density. So reference field is what it will look at to match the size and resolution to, and just use as like take on this settings from this field. And then this stuff you could do same as reference if you want, or scalar. So either one, it will be the same thing. So now when I plug this in, maybe just velocity update, now you should be able to see, should start showing up. I don't know why it's not showing up. If I middle mouse button, it might just be because it's empty. But if I look over here, you can see that there's the mask field. RH2, that's okay, we're still just getting started. So I'm pretty deep into, everything right now, but we were just starting with these bubbles. I made some improvements, and then I'm just breaking down kind of like more of an illustration of the forces that I added and the effects that I got. So I'm basically killing any velocity that's outside of areas that have density or air, making it harder for velocity to move things around in that area. So we have a mask field. You could see it show up if you look over here. Might need to go in, let it solve one frame for it to fully show up. How can we retain maximum details as original geo in VDB convert? Like I tried to turn pyrosmoke into VDB poly, but lost most of the details, unfortunately. This 2D idea was really amazing. I don't know, it's always going to be, you're going to lose some details with VDB converting smoke to polygons, just because you're only looking at one specific region, like the surface there. But volumetrically, like you're looking through the volume a little bit, so it's that's why it looks more detailed usually. You can try some stuff like adding noise or some sharpening things and that kind of stuff, but it's never gonna look like 100% as good or as detailed, I would say, with smoke compared to like polygons. So we have the mask field that we're creating. I think if we want to visualize it, like here you have all these visualizers that are kind of set up. I think what we can do is just do, let me see, maybe apply data. So this just lets you add extra data to your object. This white line here means it's working on the object or DOP objects, and then this blue, or I guess it's purple magenta, colorblind today. This thing will let you modify solvers. So that all these are microsolvers, or it's changing the solver. So with this applied data, if I just do scalar field, and then I just call this mask. So I don't have to worry about these other dimensions. Like I was saying earlier, those get overridden or adjusted by this match field. But I'm setting it up over here because then I can add this scalar field visualization. So we just have to do show guide geometry. If I want to, I can turn this one off. Just doing that teal flag. And now I should be able to visualize it, do bounding box. So you can see after the first frame, this match field is adjusting the resolution of everything to match. You do bounding box hash if you want, or other settings, but we don't see anything because our scalar field or gas match field is empty. We haven't put anything in it, we've just added an extra field, or it's like adding an extra channel to your image, but we don't have any information. So then I usually use these gas linear combinations. I don't like to use VOPs or VEX with smoke because those have to run over each individual voxel, so they get pretty slow once you scale things up. These linear combinations, like if you look at how they're doing things under the hood, they usually either use that gas calculate or gas linear calculation to do simple operations. Like this right here is where they're doing the cooling of gas, like temperature decreasing. So you can see they're just multiplying the temperature field by a value every frame. So that's linked to this cooling rate, and then they just implement that with the gas linear combination. So this just lets you do very basic mathematical operations. If you're compositing things with node-based software or anything like that, it's somewhat similar. You can copy, add, multiply, subtract. It's very simple algebraic kind of relationships. So the destination field, the interface is a little bit weird to look at first, but the more you use them, the more comfortable you'll get with them or whatever. So the destination field is what we want to write to, or the field that we're modifying. So that will be our mask field. And then for source, if I do density, then I start seeing things. So I'm basically just every frame copying the density into the mask. This is a little bit misleading because this add isn't saying add to existing. It's just saying add everything that you see in this area of the parameter interface. If I want to add, like keep adding to the existing mask field, then you have to do this. So then you can see that we're keeping kind of the history of things. So if I don't do this, it's just overwriting. It's doing the same thing as just copying the density into the mask every frame. So you can get cool things like this. It's like a smearing effect or a ghosting effect. We kind of have like a growth stuff happening there. It's not what we'll be doing with this right now. And then usually just to keep things organized, I copy the OpenCL parameter and just keep that linked up to the smoke solver setting. You'd see it grayed out some parameters that aren't supported by OpenCL, but we don't need to use them anyways, so that's okay. And then usually just keeping these somewhat named, like it's easy to stack up a bunch of them and just lose track of what you're doing. So we're copying density to mask field, just a simple operation. And then what we're after, we want to find like the opposite of the density field. So one thing I usually like to do is just make a copy of this. So if we do mask and then the source mask, you can use these coefficients and stuff to, this is just saying multiply it by this number. So if I multiply by 55, I'm just saying multiply the mask, multiply itself by 55. coefficient always means multiply. This combine operation is just how these other fields are composited together. And then instead of add, if I do, maybe this gets a bit easier. I'm going to switch this over to the infrared. So this way you can see like one, this value here will always be this color. So we're going a lot higher than 1 because we're multiplying by 55. We just go back to that. The values are a lot dimmer or less intense. So what I want to do with this is multiply it by a higher number. And then if I change my operation here to minimum and set this additional constant to 1, this is going to multiply everything by 55, but then clamp at the maximum of 1. So whichever number is lower, the source boosted by 55 or 1, it will use that number. So this way I'm kind of just really like gammaing or finding just like a 0 to 1 value of if I'm inside of the density field or outside. So basically this bright area is air and the other area is water. So we're just kind of doing a quick remap mask. And then the next thing we want to do is just kind of do like an invert operation. So instead of this finding this area, we just want to find the opposite area, the empty area essentially. So just make another copy of this. We'll still be working with mask, but this time I think we can just do add. So with this coefficient, I'm going to do -1. And then with this add right here, I'll do 1. So now we have basically an invert operation, or it's saying 1 minus the value of mask. It's a little bit weird, again, to think about, but you have to kind of write it out or spend some extra time playing around with this stuff on your own. But this is basically saying flip, we're going from 0 to 1, and then instead of that, go from 0 to -1. So we flip everything around and then shift it over by adding 1 to it. So that's how we get the equivalent of like an invert operation with image manipulation. And again, if I don't do 55 and just do 1, then you can see our mask is a little bit softer. So I'm using that coefficient, just a super high number, to basically make this mask more of a binary, like 0 or 1, inside or outside. So that's what I'm doing with this one, invert mask. And then we just need to apply it to the velocity field. So everything inside of the bubble is 0, and then everything outside is 1. I think maybe we don't want to invert it. Let's just play around and see what happens. So I'll just take another copy of this, and then this one we'll just do apply mask to vel. So this one should be back to 1. The source field is vel, and the destination field is vel. So we want to do a multiply operation. If you're just checking, like, you could prototype this, you have to be careful, but this would be multiplying velocity by a super high number each frame. So if we enable it, then you could see that things kind of explode. This is basically saying multiply the velocity field by 2 each frame. Because it feeds back, it just very quickly like goes to a exponential, or because you're feeding back the same numbers and boosting them, it's just like an exponential increase, and then it completely blows up. So we don't want to do that. We just want to multiply everything by our mask value. Should be mask to vel. So what this is saying is take my velocity field, multiply it by the mask, and then put it back into the velocity. Yeah. So it's just, I don't know, kind of trying to illustrate the other possible uses or what these happen, what these other things are used for. So now you can see it's just a lot harder. There's like more resistance for this kind of stuff to move through. This could be like condensation droplets on pavement or on paper or something like that, where there's more friction or there's more things pushing against them. It's harder for them to move around. We'll just switch this to the invert mask. The stream is ahead. I didn't see your source to feel. Yeah, I guess there's still a like 5 or 10 second delay or something like that. So let's just go back into this. Okay, so I think I forgot one thing that I was doing. So after I'm just bypass a couple of these, bring back the feedback loop. After I make a copy of this, like I'm remapping, just making this brighter and everything else 0 through this clamping operation. One of the things that I want to do is just be able to scale this mask value. So if we just do a super faint value, then when we invert it and multiply it to the velocity, instead of multiplying things by 1 or 0, now we're multiplying things by like 1 or 0.9 or something like that. So instead of completely killing the velocity in the inside or outside region, we can just reduce it or apply more of a drag amount. So this one we'll just do scale drag amount. And then copy everything. I'm just going to turn my density visualization back on and get rid of that field operation. So it should be a little bit easier to see, hopefully. Might maybe go a bit higher resolution. Maybe my particles, just make them twice as big. So this is what we have with our forces on. There's also turbulence in our other simulation and stuff like that, but it's just a quick visualization. And then without them on. We'll do our turbulence. Again, this one, I'm just going to copy the OpenCL parameter and link it up. So with this, there's a bunch of stuff that they're doing inside of this, but basically with this influence threshold, this turbulence only gets applied in areas that have density. So they're kind of already doing a special thing like that, like we're kind of building out here. So if I'm doing 0.01, this scale should be okay. Just make it a bigger number. So now you can see we're getting like some breakup of the bubbles, like they're what we're calling bubbles, they're splitting up. And then if I turn off my masking operation, my number here might be a little bit too low that I'm scaling the drag amount by. It's just kind of not having an effect. So with this number really low, you're basically saying either multiply the velocity field by 1, which is saying don't modify it, or multiply it by like 0.99, which is only a slight modification to it. So this way I'm basically saying scale, don't modify the velocity field outside of things, but reduce it by 75, only keep 75% of it, or reduce it by 25% in my masked region. So we'll do a little bit lower resolution maybe. a little bit lower division size, so higher resolution. Take a look at the results. And if you're doing two-dimensional, you might as well just go maybe into the front viewport and you can do a flip book of this. So this one will be our test with the with our drag, with our custom mask being applied. Looks more like Thunderball now. It looks, yeah, you could get just, I don't know, maybe more control over your shapes or organic, I don't know, more natural motion or whatever. So that's basically, if you, 2D is kind of like visualizing a slice of my 3D simulation. It's never like gonna match up in terms of, you can't tweak forces in two-dimensional and then make a bunch of changes to your forces and then go back to 3D and expect to see the same shapes, but you can get a good sense of just like what the forces do. I might still have too many bubbles, like things are getting a bit of a mess at that point, but we should be able to at least get a sense of what's going on. So if I just do another flip book, this one I'm just going to make my session label 1, so it just puts it into another mplay. So on the right we have our result with this mask being applied, and then on the left is without it. So hopefully you can kind of see the difference, like these things are staying more contained. It's preserving more of the little kind of bubble shapes and stuff like that, whereas these are allowed to just grow and move freely a lot more, and eventually everything is like consumed and everything's just like whooshing upwards. Whereas this microsolver stuff gets a bit weird at the end, but we're able to control the velocity field a little bit more, such that it's never allowed to completely move erratically or uncontrollably. Like, so this would be good for smoke from a bonfire that kind of has that motion, but for underwater things moving through another medium or something that applies resistance to it, that's kind of what we're doing with this mask stuff. So it might be a little bit more clear as well if I do like total count and multiply it by the frame. You do modulus 12 equals 1. This, maybe I should do 0. This is only going to add a point every 12 frames. So I'm not sure how, I don't know, usually this stuff goes a little bit faster, maybe because I'm streaming and doing a lot of other stuff, like using the GPU and all that. So you might also just want to try it without this mask inverted, and then you can try different drag amounts, 0.1 or stuff like that. You would find good values depending on just different settings. So maybe we'll do 4. I think that, set it to 1 to get them on the first frame. And then my remap or my drag amount, maybe 4. You could normalize the velocities. I didn't do that just because I think it's somewhat interesting to have things that like slip through other areas. If you look at references, like there is times when bubbles like this kind of thing happens, where you have like a stack of bubbles and then they all internally whoosh up to form a bigger bubble. So that's why I wasn't normalizing the velocity. like I still wanted to have the whooshiness inside of the bubbles, if that makes sense, but then just not allow them to continue that motion beyond that like internal force, if that makes sense. So that's what I'm trying to do here with this masking operation, or working in these different regions, is basically say anything in here, move freely, do whatever you want, but outside, I'm gonna keep reducing the velocity or multiplying it by like 0.9 or 0.8 every frame to keep just making it harder to move through that area. Like quicksand or something kind of thick is just requires a lot of force to walk through or to move through. And that's the intention of this entire force, is to say, this region outside of my bubbles, make it more resistance, more, just use up more velocity to push in that direction. But internally, velocity can move around pretty easily, or whoosh around pretty easily. But yep, just looking at this example file and playing around with things, you can use this for other kind of effects as well, and just get interesting results that way. So I'll just put this maybe back to that. I think this turbulence that I was doing might have been a little bit too much. Maybe my my drag amount is just too high. So because this happens every frame, you don't want to multiply like a certain region by 0. Like even multiplying it by 0.95 has a pretty big effect in reduction and stuff like that. So let's try these settings. Just go a little bit bigger, and then I'll go back to my unlabeled flipbook, the original one. So we'll get somewhat far with that, and then again just bypass these forces. So we're not making any mask changes at all. We're still doing the turbulence, but then we're not doing any custom microsolver nonsense. And then if we just follow kind of along with just roughly matching the same frames, I don't know, you could kind of see that this stuff is like becoming just more like a smoke, more like a gas, easily moving around wherever it wants to, whereas this stuff is behaving a little bit more contained, and we're just able to control things a little bit better. So that's the idea with this. Just save it in a new folder, just another kind of example file. Hopefully that's not too intense for people going too deep into DOPS and stuff like that. I don't know, it's hard to find a balance between I don't know how many of you are super users and how many of you are just getting started. So hopefully that wasn't too much of just like your eyes glazing over and you're already asleep. So this is 7, new month, and 1, first day of the month. Let's do a scenes directory, and then this will be custom drag force version 1. Quite intense. Sorry, yeah, it's so I think it maybe like 10 years or something like that I've been using Houdini. I've been spending a lot of my time doing the smoke solver type stuff. Like I have a ton of just like super deep knowledge into fluid simulation, doing custom things like that. So POP networks are evaluated from the bottom up, but the mask seems to be evaluated top down, like a SOP network. So it's POP networks are not evaluated bottom up, I don't believe. All of this stuff in DOPS follows a thing that's called top down, left to right. So left to right is kind of higher priority. It will look at the thing on the left and then go down because there's nothing else happening. And then it will just evaluate this. And then it will start up here, do this, do this, do this, and then keep going. And then this will happen. There's a bunch of stuff happening inside of it because we're saying left to right. These operations happen first, then these operations, and then this stuff is top down. You can also, like if I shake them free, I'm having some trouble shaking them free right now. Just need more space. You can like spread these out. Boom, boom, boom. It's kind of more tedious. And just get the scissors, cut all these. You just hold down the Y button, you can cut things. And then if you do a merge and link them all up like that, this is the same thing. In terms of order and operations, you can either link them up by connecting them all into a chain, and that's a little bit nicer. But I don't know, for me to visualize, but like if you go inside of here, they're doing merges kind of like that. You could think of these as the same way, like left to right or whatever is the way that they cook. So I usually just prefer, it's a lot more organized to me. We just go to layout, align, layout, align vertically, and connect. I think I missed that one. All right. So that's what I was doing with them. And then if you take all of these, you can just put them right in. So it's a little bit easier just to conceptualize what's happening this way. The order of operations is top down for individual streams. But then like when stuff starts to branch, it just goes left to right. Yeah, it depends just how you set things up, but you can work either way. Like everything could be a big fan and you could just work left to right, or you could mix in certain things and stuff like that. And then these last two, boost and boost. This one I'm just multiplying the temperature and the density by a very small number that's slightly higher than 1. So it's basically saying every frame keep 102% of my density or 102% of my temperature. So in one of the previous streams, I was talking kind of about like numerical dissipation. Like these density and temperature will always kind of eventually disappear. So if you just keep boosting it by a small amount, it will kind of preserve it a little bit better than not doing that. Vegan Nuts, got Zoom meetings today. I have to leave. It'll be an awesome stream. Thanks for stopping by at the start of it. Hope your meetings go well. Did definitely catch the VOD. Yeah, so hopefully this VOD is a little bit more useful. So I stopped the music just because I knew it would be getting a little bit intense or technical for a little bit. So that's what's happening with this whole modifications that I was making there. I didn't want to do all of that stuff live just because it would have been a lot more time consuming, and I think it's easier to work this way. And like, so yes, I have the gem emote. If you look, I added one. It should be there if you check the channel emotes. So I think it's a little bit easier to I don't know, for you guys to understand this, because you can see the results and then take a look at the methods, and I don't know, maybe that makes more sense instead of like just me explaining stuff from scratch and then making the results and it's just a different process or whatever. So someone was asking earlier about like adding extra detail to this, converting Pyro to polygons. So all of these operations, like a smooth is a bit nice just to reduce some of the jittering. Another thing that I added was this dilate. So if we do a dilate before the smooth, then that kind of, because the smooth shrinks things, if you inflate or expand things before that, you get smoother shapes, but you also preserve some of those little bubbles and stuff like that. If we don't do that dilate before, then we kind of lose some things. Another thing that I was talking about was like this upres. So because this is voxel scale, it's a little bit inverted in terms of the relationship. But if I kind of increase the total number of voxels before I do all these other operations, then you should see some more detail in this stuff. So 0.5 is just saying double the resolution. It makes everything a little bit slower, but the smoothing operation, all these other operations will have a little bit more voxels and stuff like that to work with. It's kind of like the same operation as subdividing. So if we look at this, after this upres, doubling the resolution, and then if I turn that back off, we'll just have less definition, or less. It's not really definition, like you can't introduce new detail using it, but you can do a little bit of stuff to preserve some of the finer like details so they don't get lost in the smooth, but then you still have kind of nice surfaces. I didn't end up using this in my render or my tests just because it's a bit slow to work with, but that's what I ended up doing. Might have been Jeff was asking about at the start, like hiding the domain. So basically when I frame this up, I think I let things go through the bottom, or maybe I was killing the particle source before they go too far outside of the container. So that's what I was saying, just about being aware of like the region that you're sourcing into and direction that things will be moving. There is like the gas resize fluid dynamic, whatever, that will automatically like adjust, but I tend not to use that because it can get like just kind of a pain to set up, and if you're using OpenCL, it doesn't really speed things up too much to have like a smaller or bigger domain. So it just makes it easier for me to debug things if I just say this is going to be the size of my tank and just don't try to hit the edges. And then up here I would just add like a deformer or a fluid surface to make it look like these are breaking through the top of the tank and then kind of like rippling and moving around. I'm not really going to spend a lot of time setting that up. And then I just did some more work over here with the bubbles. Get back to the example, just to make some more bubbles overall, so that I don't know, it just makes more sense like when you see the smaller bubbles when things kind of float away. You might want, I might have made them a bit too big. We'll go down to 0.05 and 0.03 for the biggest. And then I think this distortion type stuff in my render, it might just be a bit too over the top, but I don't know, we'll keep it for now just to make sure. It's kind of something you'd rather notice, like if you're just too subtle with it, it doesn't really make a difference with it. And then I'm gonna try to make a change here. So one of the things that I've realized is like with these smaller bubbles, they just get lost so much. in the render, when you're rendering on black, or always, just because the specular highlights become so little, and the amount of, even if I had something behind it, like because they're so small, it just wouldn't do that much distortion to things. So if you want to make these more prominent, I haven't done it in my renders, I'm just going to set it up now. One of the things that you can do is, we look at our stuff we were doing inside of this kind of tool to reverse flip the inside bubbles and keep the outside ones facing that way. One of the things we can do, just get rid of this Boolean. It's a little bit weird the way that it's wired up. So when we're copying to points, if we preserve the p-scale attribute, so just eliminate that from the mask, these parrots, or the upward arrows saying exclude all of these variables, or all these attributes. Now we still keep p-scale on our particles, or once they're copied to spheres. So we'll do the same thing over here. And then if I go up a level again and do this color SOP, and then we just visualize the p-scale. So we're keeping it on these points because it's a useful indicator. I'm just going to turn off some of those other wireframe and shading and stuff. We'll go into the light shaded for right now. So the smaller ones become black or close to 0, and the bigger bubbles are white because they're closer to the higher numbers. One of the things we can do with this is use it as a mask, or use it to modify our shader. So if we take the smaller bubbles here and instead flip this around so that they're white and these ones are 0, then we should kind of notice them a little bit more. So just play around with this. Ramps. I think that should be good. You don't want it too clamped down or too harsh. So this is kind of like illustrating turbulence, or like fast moving bubbles. They tend to have more little particles of air and just stuff happening inside of them, so you notice them a little bit more. It's kind of like whitewater or stuff like that. You tend not to render whitewater with like a glass shader because it just, you don't notice the splash. Like there's just a ton of smaller particles and stuff inside of it. So what we can do is take this range, and now we should have p-scale values. Over here there isn't a p-scale value, those will just get 0. So when I merge them together, like if I look at everything, at least they shouldn't have p-scale. Okay, so these have 0. So what I want to do to prevent them from being 0 is just make a default for them. It might just be 5 or something pretty big. And then those will be excluded from our region. So now we have the p-scale attribute here. We just visualized it. It's white for the really small particles, and then black or really low value for our highest. We've kind of remapped or flipped that range around. So if we go to our shader for it, this is just the default kind of water shader. But we can use this attribute to further modify things. So instead of UV tangents, or we've used color before, we can just use P-scale. We plug it in. This is just a quick way to visualize things. Go into our Redshift render view. Nothing happened. So I think then you don't have to plug it into a material. Usually you can plug things into the Redshift material this way and you'll get like a constant shader kind of effect. Like it will just be the actual value. I might be lying or leading you astray, but I thought it worked like this. You'd see an alpha. Like I've done it before with the noise and stuff like that. When I'm setting up frequencies for noises and things, I'll just plug them directly into this surface output, and usually it will, it's taking a while to start, but usually it will show me the actual result of the. So this way I'm able to see the noise and everything like that. Might be, I think it's possible on the Redshift ROP with attributes they're doing some special stuff with the P-scale to not have it show up that easily. It might be too low, but I thought like these bigger ones, I set them to 5, like with this attribute create. So there should be ones that are at least white or showing up. Let me just try doing a rename. So sometimes it's better not to use these internal ones because this, like I'm using this for something else. So to make it a little bit more clear, just do like bubble underscore size. And then go back into the shader. Let's try this. See if it works. All right, so I think it might have just been an issue with that P-scale attribute being named that way. Redshift might be like discarding it because it thinks you're just trying to use it to render particles, and it might just ignore it in your shader. That's my thought process. So if we want to visualize stuff, you could use this RS ramp again. We want to get back kind of closer to the way that we were working with the pyro stuff, using this infrared just to look at the ranges of things, and then maybe this change range, just to find kind of the minimum and maximum of things. So I made these particles, the big thing with the value of 5, so that they would be harder to, I don't want to isolate them, I just want to get the little ones. And then we'll go from 0 to 1, we'll go from instead the other way. So I'm looking for these small ones to start turning red. That will mean that they have the full value of 1 that they're receiving, and then everything else kind of close to purple, which basically means that they'll be getting like a value of 0. But this one here might still be a little bit too bright, too colorful. Eliminate that one. Maybe something like that. So if we could just go into the raw visualization, then we can see it this way. The reason I use this sometimes is just because you can tell when your values have clamped or reached the limit. You have like something over here that's close to white, it can be harder to tell if it's getting the full value of 1 or going beyond it or whatever. This is the easy way to see when things have clamped to the range. And then what I can do is just plug this, instead of directly like coloring the bubbles or shading them with like a diffuse component or something, you can just use this with the reflection and refraction roughness. This gets linked to both areas of reflection and refraction. So this link to reflection is overriding roughness and IOR and saying use the same value. And then I might just maybe not want to make it so big, maybe just like 0.5. And then maybe my minimum, the smaller like roughness, still want a little bit. Always adding a little bit to the bubbles to get like broader highlights. Let's you can also, I don't know if this is the best idea, but we can try it. You might also want to modify, we'll try like the IOR so that the smaller bubbles become just more reflective overall and let less light through. Like they're just more of a mirror or a glass, like more of a mirror reflection instead of, we'll let the light straight through if it's not at a glancing angle with the IOR at 1.33. So this one I'm saying the very smaller bubbles just reflect all of the light like a mirror, but the bigger bubbles just have a traditional index of refraction. If we do another snapshot and then just cut those away, or do another frame without any modifications, this is a pretty good way to work when you're kind of debugging or testing new features. New modifications to shaders, or like I was doing the same idea with the flipbooks when I was modifying the pyro forces. So we have our test where we're trying to brighten or make the smaller, very tiny air bubbles just more noticeable. And then this one, you can kind of see that they're just being like glinty or very contrasty. So this is kind of a subtle thing, but you might be able to tell here, like even when these things are reflecting other stuff, they're brighter because they're finding more air bubbles to reflect. So this is again just a very like specific finite type of tweak you might want to make, but it's good to just be able to have the control over everything. So I'm able to very easily control how noticeable or how prominent these smaller particles are. So things that are around the size of 4 or 5 pixels, we just want them to be like a frosted glass kind of effect. And then the bigger particles just still kind of behave like water, or the boundary between water and air or whatever. Yeah, so that's my goal, is just to make them more prominent or noticeable. We'll go back here. So this one was roughness. This one was IOR. So I mean, it's not something you might always want to do with bubbles, or it's kind of a very specific thing for this case. But I think like working with visual effects or clients or directors, they usually have very specific notes sometimes like this, where it's like, why do these small ones, they just don't look natural. I think I messed something up. Stuff turned into a like subsurface material. So this guy, we're doing, maybe I just need to render it again. Reflection IOR, reflection roughness. Yeah, but sometimes directors and clients, they have very specific notes. You could also do like add a diffuse component. It's, I don't know, I prefer not to do that just because it's GPU render. Joao, what's poppin'? We're just finishing up the bubbles. That's what's poppin'. So I was making some tweaks in my simulation to get a little bit better, more like contained motion. If you go back to the VOD, you'll see some really deep technical, broke out the lab coat in the whiteboard and did some super specific things to the pyro simulation to make these air bubbles just more contained. Like every empty region, just make that harder to move through so that these are able to just move in a more straighter direction. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate any subs. If you have the Prime account or Amazon Prime, you can link that with Twitch. That helps support the stream, the community can spend more time on this kind of stuff. But I mean, I know that there's a pandemic, a lot of other factors at play, so don't worry too much about if you can't afford it. Don't worry, don't stress out about it. But yeah, I'm just trying to provide a good opportunity for people to learn. Everyone's locked inside. We might as well group up, exchange Houdini gems and tools and techniques and stuff. So yeah, this is where I started, was tweaking the forces, and then now I was going into the shader and making a specific mask so that we can render the smaller bubbles like frosted glass, so that they're more prominent. We don't lose them in the darkness or whatever. Mr. Wazoo, the bubbles have materialized. Look at those clean boys. Yeah, so the smaller ones, we're just making them more orb-like, like a magical orb or something like that. So we'll maybe just try this. We just go back to the out network. Just go back to any node on the farm. I think my settings, I just tweaked them to be a little bit faster, like half frame, like 960 by it's a 1K frame or whatever. And then I'll just save this, go into the new July folder. Maybe this will be 12, and I might be able to submit and should start seeing some frames pretty quickly. We might be able to compare these two results. But yeah, I was going into the Redshift shader, just doing some tweaks with the reflection roughness and the IOR, so that we're basically getting more highlights, or eventually just turning the small particles completely white. So based off of the p-scale or the particle size, tweaking the shader to have a different response to it than the bigger ones. By the way, I've seen it this week and didn't have the chance to ask, do you need another Houdini license to use it, or render farm with Redshift, or just another RS render node? So I think I posted some stuff in the Discord, but with Houdini Indie, the engine licenses are free. Like, you should have unlimited non-graphical render like batch or engine licenses for Houdini. So if you have additional computers that don't have monitors hooked up to them, you don't need to keep buying more Indie licenses. You can just keep getting more engine licenses for them for free. But with Redshift, you do need another render license or another Redshift for each additional computer you're adding. But if you have one that has a lot of slots in it, you could have like 4 GPUs or 6 GPUs in it, and then you still just need one license. So that's one way to kind of be efficient or save money or whatever. So I'm kind of working with what I have, and that's how I ended up with my configuration. You have the effects license at work and we use Deadline. We're considering buying Redshift, so that's why I'm asking. Yeah, I mean, mixing and matching, I don't know too much about their commercial licensing programs or Deadline because I haven't like priced that out or spec'd it out. But with Houdini working yourself, like HQ is free. And then the additional Indy engine licenses are free. So if you have a bunch of computers lying around, you can just do Houdini HQ, and then you just need another Redshift license or whatever. Deadline, the first 2 nodes are free. I did try to set it up at the start, but it was a little bit, I just ran into like problems with the MongoDB, or I don't know. It's a lot more overhead, or it just seemed a little bit harder to configure. I ended up giving up on it. But Deadline's a pretty good renderer. Mantra is, yeah, so you have unlimited mantra nodes, so you could really, like just with an Indy license, if you have a lot of computers, you could really set up a pretty powerful farm. But you just need to spend a lot of money on computers then, because it's so slow, and then even doing look dev locally is pretty frustrating and stuff like that. So it looks like we have a lot of frames already. Let's take a look. They're all empty. What have I done? I made a mistake. I don't know what the... Oh, so when I saved this in a new directory, it couldn't find this original file anymore. I just have to link this up to the previous stream. What is this? This one, Geo, Sim. We have 20 Z820s, but still I can batch out more frames in Redshift at the same time. It's unreal. Yeah, I think just working with Mantra is pretty difficult. Like I was saying, setting up renders, like trying to find settings locally is a bit of a pain, and then it just seems like you run into like having an 8-hour frame with Mantra isn't that unheard of. Like you're rendering a pretty high resolution effect and it's got a lot of stuff happening in the frame. You could expect it to take like 8 hours, and with Redshift you might be able to do the same thing with like 20 minutes or something. So even if you have 20 computers, it doesn't help that much. So we'll go back to my out network and should be able to try this again. Got a bunch of black frames. Nothing better. It's a bottleneck. Yeah, they have pretty old Quadros. Yeah, I mean, it's always, as from a facility standpoint or whatever, like gearing up for a bunch of work. There's not, still to this day, there isn't like a super definitive, like, this is the way to go. Like, you could buy GPUs and get pretty good performance, but the big problem people have with those is that they're going to be obsolete in like 5 years or 2 years or something. So they don't want to invest a ton of money into a GPU farm, but just it seems like everything's generally heading in that direction. So at some point you kind of have to make the decision, bite the bullet. So let's see if these frames are showing up. Some of them are, some of them aren't. I've done something terrible. All right, so I'm just going to cancel this job on the farm, and then just locally, I'll just go to mplay. You're the only Houdini guy, the rest deals with V-Ray. Yes, that's just when you're going on the working at a commercial place, like you have to share resources, so that's why people don't use HQ. And then there's just a bunch of other factors that's too in depth to go over here and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult call to make. It's always going to be a bottleneck, no matter what you do, and even doing farm GPU rendering, it gets a bit expensive, and it's a lot of bandwidth switching between the two stuff and all that. V-Ray for Houdini is okay, I would say. I'm using their plugin for my regular work or job right now, but it's not that well developed. Like, it's not as integrated as Redshift is, I would say. They don't really support like packed geometry as well. It's just a little bit more like rough around the edges, I think. Yeah, the beta was like super buggy, it seemed like, and super not that well implemented. It's getting better, but it's still not like Redshift is probably the best like third-party renderer that's GPU renderer, just renderer that's integrated into Houdini. So we might be able to see some differences here if I just go to like frame 7. It might be hard to see, but what I'm hoping to do is just maybe up here you could kind of tell. So these small bubbles, instead of letting them not be that easy to like reflect lights, I've made a bunch of shader modifications to try to keep them like a blurry reflection and then a higher IOR value, more of like a mirror, just so that they're more noticeable. With these smaller bubbles, it just always gets easy to kind of lose them. Rendering them on black or rendering them on any background, they don't distort the optics when the light goes through them that much, and then it's just harder for them to reflect things. Generally, I don't know what happened here. Air. Generally, like these smaller particles I was saying earlier, they're more filled with air or other particles or stuff like that, so they will reflect more light. So that was my like mathematical, my physics, physical properties reason for doing it. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know. I still need to iron down my like local working rendering situation. It would be a lot easier to rip. I wish I could rip through these renders and examples and stuff a lot quicker. So I did the two-dimensional fluid solver earlier just to like demonstrate stuff in more of a real-time, not real-time like a game engine, but just get quicker feedback. So I don't know. I'm still fixing that area of my stream. Hopefully we'll get quicker renders and stuff like that in the future. But yeah, this is pretty much as far as I'm going to take this bubble effect, I think. Could probably do a little bit of tweaking just with those shader settings to get stuff looking better. The lack of deployable whiteboard and meter stick. I was breaking out this thing earlier in the day, but my Wacom tablet is so small it was hard for me to draw on. But this was what we were doing with these bubbles. Yeah, this is the whiteboard. So in my previous sims and previous streams, our air bubble was just treated as a density field, and it was able to move in any direction it wanted to very easily. It could move this way, it could move that way, all without any resistance. And then what I was doing was making a mask field by basically saying any of these areas that don't have density, everything that's outside of the air bubble, essentially, like mask out or multiply the velocity down by 90% every frame, and then inside keep it at 100%, so that these things can move like internally or with turbulence move outward somewhat easily, but then once they spread out, like it just is harder for them to kind of spread out. I don't know, it's harder hard for me to draw, but if you watch the first like 30-40 minutes of the stream, it gets into that kind of stuff pretty intense with the gas linear combination and a bunch of those nodes. So I might not have nailed it perfectly. All this stuff too is just super subjective. Like rendering is a big brain moment. Rendering everything. It's a 5-head moment. Rendering everything is very subjective, especially with water. Like you could change the IOR and the reflection roughness to different values. Like it just depends on the shot and what the director wants. So I wouldn't always recommend. You got the brain emoji. That's a special emote. I need to find something better for it because I feel it looks too much like the default. Like there's already one of those in the ASCII like emote database or whatever. But like I was saying, you could feel free to actually just modify the IOR and reflection roughness with like whatever values you want if you find you're getting better results. You don't have to stick with the physical 1.3 or 1.33 or whatever. But yeah, this is probably going to be the last stream we spend on this underwater bubble thing. So we got like three session breakdown on kind of setting it up, iterating on the results, and then just doing some like if you were to address some very specific notes, like how you would really dive in and do some technical stuff like that. So hopefully it's a good variety of working stages of working on an effect like this. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the Discord or put them in the chat, wherever you might put them. Yeah. Anyone doing the Hulai? Got any Hulais in the chat? This has been so good down the rabbit hole with bubbles. You've seen ads with bubbles now. Yeah, I think they get used. It's a good effect to know. I think I saw something with them somewhat recently, but I don't remember. But yeah, even just learning fluid motion in depth and all this stuff, like this is using the Pyro solver, so you could do, this could be, I don't know, you even make like icicles with this if you added a lot of viscosity or drag or something. You could use this as smoke and do like bullet trails. Like this could be little missiles or flak or cannon, or I don't know, some kind of little shrapnel that gets blasted out of a thing. The little spiky lines from a explosion. It looks like it's starting to work maybe. Let me take a look. This is frame 14. It's kind of hard to tell. I just think that the smaller bubbles aren't that visible. Like there aren't that many of them that have been created. You could see it in certain areas, I would say pretty easily. Like this one compared with that one, I think it's the same bubble. You just notice it, or it stands out more. Like in this one, I just ended up making probably too many bubbles overall, but I think it's a better composition to just see a lot of smaller bubbles, but just make them more noticeable. So it's like a little bit, just looks too CG generally when you see like these sparkling, glimmering ones. So usually motion blur, like they're just moving around so much when they're that small, or I don't know, there's a lot of air particles inside of them, so they just catch more of the light. So that was the idea behind going super down the rabbit hole into the shader. You guys want to see what I'm doing with this the crackhead falling man? So I added these drones and stuff to kind of flying around him when he starts to crumble. Keep thinking I may try some Hulai 2020 fog projects just to challenge myself, even if I have 0 chance. Yeah, I mean, it seems like a lot of people have been just trying things out. You get like a prize or something for just posting stuff, and I think some people are giving feedback, or it's just a good way to engage with the community or get a routine down, even if it's just practice. Yeah, so this is CG. It was just started as a participation trophy. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. Submit the most basic stuff so you can get the free things. Yeah, so that falling guy started as the one of the Cool Zone experimentations. And then I've just gone through with a bunch of different render iterations, trying different lighting compositions and techniques and stuff like that. I found that adding these like other piles of powder or dust or whatever makes it a little bit more interesting. Like, it's kind of, I don't know, it's just like adding some mystery or intrigue into the shot. Yeah, and then I started finding like lighting was always a bit flat or just uninteresting. So I started adding these little drones with spotlights kind of parented or attached to them, just to like make it more, give it more of a sense of scale, or like a intrigue. I don't know, something going on. I added this like volumetric stuff blowing, just a procedural noise, but just to give it some more interesting atmosphere and stuff like that. And then I retimed the simulation of him falling, I think like 25% of the original speed, again, to give it more scale and stuff like that. Yeah, so I might, these things are somewhat slow to render with all the atmospherics and everything, but I might just try some more shots or try to make a cut of a few different shots, like doing another perspective or something here with like a guy on the ground or something. I don't know, it could be cool. We get let's see if I can do it. So go into our annotation and we'll do smaller size. Maybe it's some little guy. Whoa, what's going on? And then just to give it more of a sense of scale. Yeah, it could be cool with the drones. There's a lot of interesting ideas and stuff I had with, like, even leading up to this, if you had like an aerial top-down shot with these drones like flying in a formation, exploring the mounds or piles of crack or dust or whatever we're saying that substance is, it could just be an interesting little experiment or shot. So I, like originally with that Cool Zone stuff, I had intended, I mean, I'm usually going to intend for it to be just a simple kind of Instagram render or style frame, but this one, it kind of became so promising that I might just turn it into like a little mini personal project, or I don't know, something for the portfolio or whatever you want to call it. I'm still playing around with this lighting, like could be cool to have it more dramatic like this. So very film noir, suspenseful kind of look. But yeah, I don't know. I got tied down with this thing, so I don't know how long I'll be able to spend on the Hulai challenges and just doing streams and all the other stuff too. I might have to sit a lot of them out, so we'll see. It looks like maybe I should have changed my ramp around, like my settings, to catch more of the bubbles. But it does look like it's working. Like these smaller ones are always somewhat white or somewhat opaque. Before we were just completely losing some of them, like they were turning completely black or just harder to see on some frames more than others, so you get more glittering, kind of like non-deterministic noise. But with this roughness in the reflection, we reduce that kind of sizzling and just get more of a consistent animation, which probably just looks a little bit more polished or refined in the end. Yeah, so probably gonna end it here. Hopefully this VOD is useful. Hopefully it doesn't get too down the rabbit hole of whiteboards and stuff like that. If you're watching that on YouTube or after the fact, please, if you can, come over to Twitch and participate or subscribe at least. Gives me a little bit of a boost in the sub points and helps support all of this content getting produced. Join the Discord as well if you're not a member of it. All right, guys, we got the Cool Zone. See you Friday. Take it easy. Have a good start to your July.